A missed appointment, a single photograph. That's all it took to shatter a picture-perfect life. For Olivia, it was the day of her baby's first ultrasound, a day her billionaire husband Richard swore he wouldn't miss. But while she was alone in that cold, sterile room, he was somewhere else entirely. He was on a sun-drenched beach, his arm wrapped not around his pregnant wife, but around a woman the world would soon know. He thought his secrets were safe, buried under piles of money. He had no idea he was married to a woman who was about to make him headline news. The silence in the ultrasound room was a living thing. It was a cold, clinical hum that seemed to amplify the frantic thumping of Olivia's own heart. She stared at the large monitor, a blank grey screen that held the promise of her future, a future she was supposed to be sharing. Her hand, trembling slightly, rested on the curve of her stomach. 4 months. 4 months of morning sickness, of strange cravings, and of a burgeoning love so fierce it almost frightened her. "He's just running a little late, I'm sure," Dr. Evans said, her voice a practiced, soothing melody that did nothing to calm the storm in Olivia's chest. "Richard is a busy man." Olivia forced a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack her face. "Yes, always busy." She had repeated that phrase so many times, it had become a mantra, an excuse, a shield. Richard Sterling, the real estate mogul, the darling of Wall Street, the man whose face was plastered on the cover of Forbes, was always busy. His time was measured in millions of dollars, in deals that shaped the city's skyline. She knew that. She had accepted that. But today was supposed to be different. He had promised. "Live my love," he'd said just last night, his voice a low, intoxicating rumble as he traced the line of her jaw. "Nothing in this world would make me miss seeing our baby for the first time. I'll move mountains. I'll reschedule the mare. That's our moment." His words, like everything else about him, had been perfect. Richard was a master architect, not just of buildings, but of moments. Their life together was a carefully constructed masterpiece of glamour and romance. Spontaneous trips to Paris on his private jet, front row seats at New York Fashion Week, whispered sweet nothings over candle-lit dinners at restaurants, so exclusive they didn't have names. He had swept into her life a whirlwind of charm and power, and she, a quiet, unassuming librarian, had been caught up in the storm, dizzy with a happiness she'd never imagined possible. But lately the perfection had started to feel fragile. There were the hushed phone calls he would take in the other room, the sudden business trips that seemed to pop up with alarming frequency. When she'd asked, he'd smiled, that disarming smile of his, the one that made her feel silly and paranoid. "Just putting out fires, my love. The price of success." And she had believed him. She wanted to believe him. An hour passed. The grey screen remained blank. Dr. Evans, her professional patience wearing thin, suggested they reschedule. Olivia felt a hot flush of shame. The other women in the waiting room with their proud, beaming partners had glanced at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The pregnant wife of the billionaire, all alone. "No, let's just do it," Olivia said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't bear the thought of coming back, of reliving this humiliation. She needed to see her baby. She needed to know that one thing at least was real. The cold gel on her stomach was a shock. She flinched as Dr. Evans moved the transducer. And then it happened. A flicker on the screen. A tiny, pulsating shape. A sound filled the room, a rhythmic, powerful whooshing that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Evans said, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "Strong and steady. Congratulations, Olivia. You have a very healthy baby." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, hot and silent. It was a girl, her daughter. In that moment, the ache of Richard's absence was a sharp, physical pain, a gaping wound in what should have been a perfect memory. She took the grainy, black-and-white photos, her fingers caressing the image of the tiny life inside her. She sent him a text. "We saw her today. She's perfect." The reply came hours later, a terse, impersonal message. "Knew she would be. So sorry, Liv. Got dragged into an emergency meeting with investors from Dubai. Still locked in. We'll make it up to you, I promise." The disappointment was a bitter pill. She tried to swallow it to be the understanding wife she had always been. She drew a bath in their palatial penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. She tried to focus on the joy on the little girl who was now her entire world, but the unease lingered a shadow she couldn't shake. It was that night as she mindlessly scrolled through her phone, a habit she'd picked up to fill the long, lonely evenings that the shadow took form. It started as a knot in her stomach, a prickle of dread. Her friend Maya had sent her a link to a popular Instagram gossip account, one that chronicled the lives of the rich and shameless. The caption was innocuous: "Another day in paradise." But the picture stole the air from her lungs. It was a selfie, a sun-drenched, carefree selfie taken on a pristine white sand beach. In the foreground, a woman with a mane of platinum blonde hair and a predatory smile pouted at the camera. Her name was Chloe Vanderbilt, a socialite and so-called influencer, whose manufactured life was a constant source of tabloid fodder. But it wasn't Chloe's face that made Olivia's world tilt on its axis. It was the man beside her. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed, a pair of expensive sunglasses perched on his head. His arm was wrapped possessively around Chloe's waist, his hand splayed possessively on her hip. He was smiling a wide, genuine, unguarded smile that Olivia hadn't seen in months. It was Richard. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The emergency meeting with Dubai investors. The city skyline behind him wasn't Dubai. It wasn't even New York. It was the unmistakable turquoise water and lush green hills of St. Bart's. The lie was so audacious, so brazen it was almost comical. He hadn't just missed the most important day of her life. He had been with another woman. He had posted the evidence for the world to see, a digital middle finger to her and their unborn child. The heartbreak was a tidal wave, a crushing force that left her gasping for breath. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of her despair. It was a cold, hard fury, an emotion so intense it burned away the tears. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a quiet, compliant accessory to his perfect life. He had never bothered to look deeper, to see the steel beneath the silk. He thought he could break her heart and walk away unscathed. That night, lying alone in their king-sized bed, the city lights mocking her with their cold, indifferent beauty, Olivia made a promise to herself and to the tiny, sleeping life inside her. Richard Sterling wanted to be famous. He loved the spotlight. Well, she was about to give him the performance of a lifetime. He didn't know it yet, but he had just become the star of a new story, and she would be the one writing the headlines. The first 24 hours were a blur of managed hysteria. Olivia moved through the opulent emptiness of the penthouse, like a ghost, her every action mechanical. She made coffee she didn't drink. She stared out at the panoramic view of Central Park without seeing it. The picture on her phone was a brand on her mind, seared into her memory with the heat of betrayal. Richard, Chloe, St. Bart's, her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, was a liar, and not just a simple liar, but one of breathtaking arrogance. The sheer audacity of it was what kept replaying in her mind. He hadn't even bothered to be discreet. It was a public declaration of his infidelity, a smug display of his power. He believed he was untouchable, that his wealth and status were a shield that made him invulnerable to consequences. His texts started coming in a steady stream, a pathetic attempt at damage control. Liv just landed back in NY. Meeting was a killer. I'm exhausted. Heading straight to the office. So much to catch up on. Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you. Each message was a fresh twist of the knife. She didn't reply. Her silence was a new and unfamiliar weapon, and she wielded it with a chilling precision. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. For the first time in their relationship, she had the upper hand, and she had no intention of relinquishing it. That afternoon, the doorbell chimed a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the funereal silence. It was Maya, her best friend, since their college days, a fiery, no-nonsense lawyer with a bullshit detector that was second to none. She took one look at Olivia's pale, tear-streaked face and enveloped her in a hug that was fierce and protective. I saw it. Maya said, her voice laced with a venom that was strangely comforting. That scumbag. That narcissistic, fame-hungry pig. I swear, Olivia, I will personally key his precious Bugatti. Olivia let out a choked laugh that was half a sob. Don't bother. It's probably a lease. Maya pulled back her sharp, intelligent eyes, scanning Olivia's face. What are you going to do? I don't know, Olivia whispered the confession, a painful admission of her own helplessness. He owns everything. This apartment, the cars, the bank accounts. I'm a librarian, Maya. I have a savings account with $3,000 in it. You have more than that, Maya said, her voice firm. You have a prenuptial agreement. I read every single word of that document before I let you sign it. It's ironclad. He might be a bastard, but his lawyers are meticulous. There's an infidelity clause. A big one. The prenup. Olivia had almost forgotten about it. At the time, it had seemed like a cold, cynical document, a jarring intrusion into their fairy tale romance. Richard had dismissed it as a mere formality, a piece of paper for the bean counters. Now it was her only life raft in a sea of uncertainty. But I'll have to prove it. Olivia said, the practicalities of the situation crashing down on her. He'll deny it. He'll say the picture is old, that it's photoshopped. He'll hire the best lawyers in the city to paint me as a hysterical gold-digging wife. Let him try, Maya said, a predatory glint in her eye. Public opinion is a powerful thing, Liv. And right now, public opinion is not on his side. She pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She brought up the gossip site, the comments section, a raging dumpster fire of public outrage, while his pregnant wife is at home. What a pig, Chloe Vanderbilt is a notorious home wrecker. No surprise there. I hope his wife takes him to the cleaners. The comments were a balm to her wounded soul. She wasn't alone. The world saw him for what he was. But it wasn't enough. A few nasty comments on a gossip blog wouldn't bring down a man like Richard Sterling. He would weather the storm, release a carefully crafted PR statement, and in a few weeks the world would move on to the next scandal. I need more than just a picture, Maya. Olivia said, her voice growing stronger, a new and unfamiliar resolve taking root in the ashes of her heartbreak. I need something he can't deny, something that will ruin him. Maya looked at her, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. There's the Olivia I know, the one who aced her thesis on investigative journalism. You've been playing the part of the dutiful wife for so long, I think you forgot who you really are. It was true. She had submerged her own identity in her own ambitions and passions, taking a back seat to his all-consuming career. She had become an extension of him, a beautifully dressed accessory on his arm, and in doing so she had given him all the power. No more. His entire life is a lie. Maya. Olivia said, her mind racing the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving starting to click into place. The charity work for his foundation, the ethical sourcing of his building materials, the carefully cultivated image of a self-made man. It's all a facade. I've seen things. I've overheard conversations. I never put it all together. She thought of the late-night meetings with men in expensive suits who looked more like gangsters than businessmen. The hushed, cryptic phone calls about zoning variances and political donations. The second set of accounting books she'd accidentally stumbled upon in his home office, which he'd quickly explained away as creative tax strategies. At the time, she had chosen to believe him to turn a blind eye to the darkness that lurked beneath the glittering surface of their life. Now she saw it all with a terrifying clarity. He's not just a cheater, Maya. Olivia said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. He's a crook, and I'm going to expose him for what he really is. The decision once made was like a shot of adrenaline. The grief was still there, a dull, throbbing ache in her chest. But it was now overlaid with a new and exhilarating sense of purpose. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman on a mission. That evening, when Richard finally came home, he found her sitting in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. She looked calm, composed, almost serene. He, on the other hand, was a mess. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Liv. He began, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed contrition. I am so sorry. I know I messed up. The meeting. It was a nightmare. I should have been there. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. She looked at him, her gaze cool and steady. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply held up her phone, the picture of him and Chloe displayed on the screen. The color drained from his face. He stared at the image, his jaw working for a long, silent moment. The mask of the charming, devoted husband slipped, and for the first time, she saw the real Richard Sterling. He was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. You should have been more careful, she said, her voice as calm and quiet as the eye of a hurricane. Social media is a tricky thing. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Don't be naive, Olivia. You think a silly picture is going to hurt me. I'll have my PR team issue a statement. We'll say it was a business trip, that Chloe is a client. It will all blow over. I'm sure it will, she said, standing up, the movement fluid and graceful. She walked to the window, her back to him, and looked out at the city that he believed he owned. But this isn't about the picture, Richard. This is about everything else. He frowned, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. What are you talking about? She turned to face him, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. You really should be more careful about the things you leave lying around your office. Zoning variances, political donations, creative tax strategies. It's all so fascinating. The blood drained from his face. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. And in her eyes, he didn't see the quiet, adoring wife he had married. He saw a stranger, a formidable, intelligent, and very, very angry stranger. What have you done? He whispered, his voice hoarse, with a dawning, horrified realization. Nothing yet, she said, her smile widening. But the night is young, and I have a feeling tomorrow's headlines are going to be very, very interesting. The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, transformed into Olivia's strategic command center. The initial dizzying rush of defiance had settled into a cold, calculated resolve. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was an intelligence operative deep in enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the elevator sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Richard was home less and less consumed with what he called damage control for the St. Bart's photo, a firestorm that his PR team was struggling to extinguish. This gave Olivia the time she needed. With Maya acting as her handler on the outside, they began to map out their strategy. He's arrogant, Maya had said during one of their encrypted calls, and arrogant men get sloppy. He won't believe you have the guts or the intelligence to actually do anything. Use that. Olivia did. She played the part of the wounded, withdrawn wife to perfection. She was quiet, tearful, and seemingly broken. When Richard was home, she would flinch from his touch, her silence a constant passive-aggressive rebuke that fed his ego. He saw her as defeated, which was precisely what she wanted. Her first target was his home office. It was his sanctuary, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk carved from a single piece of obsidian. It was where he held his most secret meetings and took his most cryptic calls. She had a key, of course, but he'd recently installed a new state-of-the-art security system with a keypad. For days, she watched him, her mind a sponge absorbing every detail. She noticed he would often tap his fingers on the table when he was thinking a nervous, rhythmic pattern. One evening, as he was distracted by a furious phone call with his publicist, she watched from the doorway as he absently tapped out the code on the desk before entering it into the keypad. It was a sequence of 8 digits, the date of his first major real estate acquisition. It was so perfectly, narcissistically him. The next day, as soon as he left for the office, she was inside. The room smelled of him. Expensive cologne and an undercurrent of metallic tension. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she began her search. She wasn't looking for paper. Richard was too smart for that. Everything was digital, protected by layers of encryption. Her librarian skills, once a source of gentle mockery for Richard's high-flying friends, were now her sharpest weapon. She knew how to find information, how to see patterns in chaos. She remembered stumbling upon a strange-looking external hard drive a few months ago, tucked away in a drawer of his antique Globe bar. He had snatched it from her, his reaction unusually sharp, saying it was a backup of old family photos. It was the only time he had ever seemed genuinely rattled by her presence in his office. It was still there, nestled between a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan and a set of crystal tumblers. It was a sleek silver rectangle, no bigger than a deck of cards. Plugging it into his desktop, she was met with a password prompt. She tried the usuals: his birthday, her birthday, their anniversary, the name of his first company. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at her. She sat in his leather chair, the silence of the apartment pressing in on her. What was the one thing he loved more than his money, more than his own reflection, his legacy, the narrative he had so carefully constructed? She thought back to their first date, how he had spoken with such passion about the Sterling Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that was his crowning achievement. He had called it his true north. She typed the words into the password field, True North 212. The drive unlocked. It was a labyrinth of folders and subfolders, a digital maze of shell corporations, offshore accounts and encrypted ledgers. It was the second set of books she had glimpsed, but on a scale she could never have imagined. This wasn't just creative tax strategy. This was a massive, sophisticated web of fraud, bribery, and money laundering. Millions of dollars siphoned from company accounts, moved through a series of untraceable transactions, and funneled into the pockets of city officials, zoning board members, and union bosses. She found a folder labeled Project Nightingale. Inside was a detailed accounting of payments made to a shell corporation, which in turn had made a series of political donations to Councilman Robert Jennings, a man who had been instrumental in pushing through the zoning changes for Richard's latest luxury development. It was a clear, undeniable case of bribery. Her hands trembled as she copied the files onto a new encrypted thumb drive she had purchased with cash. This was it. This was more than just a messy divorce. This was a federal crime. But as she was about to eject the drive, a different folder caught her eye. It was labeled Chloe. Her breath hitched. Against her better judgment, she clicked it open. It wasn't love letters or romantic photos. It was a series of wire transfers, monthly payments of $50,000 sent to Chloe Vanderbilt for the past 2 years. The memo on each transfer was the same consulting fee. And then she saw the contract, a non-disclosure agreement signed by Chloe that essentially paid her to be Richard's public girlfriend. The contract stipulated a certain number of public appearances, a steady stream of social media posts, and absolute discretion about the true nature of their arrangement. It was a business transaction. Even his affair was a carefully managed illusion. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it sharpened her anger into a diamond-hard point. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had cheapened the very idea of love and affection, reducing it to another line item on his balance sheet. As she was absorbing this new, sickening revelation, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The chime of the private elevator. He was back. Her mind raced. She couldn't be found here. Not now. She hastily ejected the thumb drive, shoved it into her pocket, and tried to close the folders, but her fumbling fingers betrayed her. The Chloe folder was still open on the screen. She shut down the computer, praying it would be fast enough. The sound of his key in the front door was a death knell. She slipped out of the office, closing the door silently behind her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was halfway down the hall when he walked in, his face a thunderous mask. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I was looking for a book," she stammered, her mind seizing on the first plausible lie. "I thought I left one in there." His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over her, then flickered towards the office door. He walked past her into the room she had just vacated. She stood frozen in the hallway, every muscle tensed. She heard the soft whir of the computer booting up, a silence that stretched for an eternity. When he emerged, his face was unreadable. He looked at her, a long, searching gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of her deception. She braced herself for the explosion, for the accusations, for the end of the charade. But instead he smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Find your book," he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "No," she whispered. It wasn't there. "Too bad," he said, walking towards her. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "You look tired, Liv. Why don't you go lie down? I'll have dinner sent up." It was a dismissal, a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. He knew, or he suspected, and he was letting her know that he was watching. The game had changed. He was no longer underestimating her. He was hunting her. As she walked to their bedroom on unsteady legs, the encrypted thumb drive in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She had the ammunition she needed to destroy him. But now it was a race against time. She had to get it to someone who could use it before he found a way to silence her for good. The air in the penthouse had become thin and sharp, each breath a calculated risk. Richard's feigned gentleness was far more terrifying than any overt rage. He moved around the apartment with a predatory grace, his eyes constantly following her. He would ask casual questions about her day, about her phone calls, about her conversations with Maya. It was a subtle psychological water torture designed to make her break. She knew her digital footprint was being monitored, her phone likely bugged. The game had escalated, and she was running out of moves. "You can't do this alone anymore," Maya insisted, during a hushed meeting in a noisy coffee shop, a place so public and mundane she hoped it was safe. "You need to get that drive to a professional, someone he can't buy or intimidate." There was only one name that came to mind: Thea Gallo. Gallo was a legend, an old-school investigative journalist with a Pulitzer Prize and a reputation for being a bulldog. She had taken down corrupt senators, exposed corporate malfeasance at the highest levels, and was famously immune to the charms and threats of powerful men. Her column in the New York Chronicle was a weekly dose of righteous fury that struck fear into the hearts of the city's elite. Richard hated her. He had once called her a bitter, sanctimonious harpy after she'd written a scathing piece about the tax breaks given to his company. Contacting her was the next challenge. Olivia couldn't use her own phone or email. She went to a public library, a place that felt like a return to a former, safer self, and used a computer to create an anonymous email address. Her message was brief and cryptic. Subject Project Nightingale. I have information about Richard Sterling, information he would kill to keep quiet. If you want the biggest story of your career, meet me. Friday, 4 p.m. The Folly. The Folly was a forgotten, graffiti-covered ruin in Central Park, a decorative structure from the 19th century that was now little more than a curiosity for tourists. It was open public, yet offered enough secluded corners to have a conversation without being easily seen. She signed the email Cassandra, the Trojan princess cursed to speak the truth but never be believed. It felt fitting. The 2 days leading up to the meeting were the longest of her life. She felt Richard's suspicion like a physical weight, his presence a constant, suffocating pressure. He suggested they go away for the weekend to their house in the Hamptons. Just the two of us, he'd said, his voice laced with a meaning that made her skin crawl. We need to reconnect. She made an excuse, a checkup with Dr. Evans she couldn't possibly miss. The lie felt flimsy, and she saw a flicker of cold anger in his eyes before he masked it with a sigh of disappointment. On Friday, She dressed in the most anonymous clothes she owned: jeans, a nondescript grey hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She took a meandering route to the park, switching subway trains 3 times, paying with cash. She felt like a character in a spy novel, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Thea Gallo was already there. She was smaller than Olivia had imagined, with a shock of unruly salt and pepper hair, and eyes that were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. She was leaning against a stone archway, pretending to read a book. But Olivia could see her gaze sweeping the area, cataloguing every person who walked by. Cassandra Thea asked, her voice a low, gravelly rasp, not even looking up from her book as Olivia approached. "Yes. You've got 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of my time." Olivia's hands trembled as she pulled the thumb drive from her pocket. "It's all on here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the ledgers for Project Nightingale. He has Councilman Jennings in his pocket. It's all documented." Thea finally looked at her, her gaze sharp and appraising. She didn't take the drive. A lot of people make accusations against Richard Sterling. He's a rich, powerful man. It comes with the territory. Why should I believe you because I'm his wife? The words hung in the air between them. Thea's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She studied Olivia's face, seeing past the hoodie and the fear to the desperate resolve beneath. Why Thea asked the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why now? Why turn on him? What's in it for you? Olivia's hand went to her stomach, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "He missed our baby's first ultrasound to be with his mistress in St. Bart's," she said, her voice cracking with a raw, undeniable pain. "He thinks I'm just a quiet, stupid accessory he can discard when he's bored. He's about to find out how wrong he is. It was the detail that sealed it. Not the financial data, but the human story. The betrayal." Thea Gallo knew that the best stories weren't about numbers. They were about hubris, and Richard Sterling's hubris was about to be his downfall. She held out her hand. "Give it to me." Olivia placed the drive in her palm. The transfer of power was immediate. The weight on her shoulders lifted, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of inevitability. She had lit the fuse. Now all she could do was wait for the explosion. "Go home," Thea said, her voice softening slightly. "Act normal. Say nothing. Don't contact me again. I'll find you if I need you. And Olivia." Olivia turned. "Be careful." The first article dropped 4 days later. It was the front-page story of the Chronicle above the fold. The headline was a masterpiece of journalistic aggression: Sterling's Shadow Empire, a trail of bribes, shell companies, and betrayed trust. The article didn't mention Olivia. It didn't mention Chloe Vanderbilt or the trip to St. Bart's. It was a cold, surgical dissection of Richard's business practices. Thea laid out the evidence with meticulous precision, detailing the creation of the Shell Corporation, the suspicious timing of the political donations to Councilman Jennings, and the subsequent favorable zoning decisions that had netted Sterling's company hundreds of millions of dollars. She didn't publish the documents themselves that would be her next move, but she described their contents in such detail that it was clear her source was impeccable. Olivia was in the kitchen making tea when Richard came storming in, his face purple with rage. He was holding a copy of the paper, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "Did you see this trash?" he roared, slamming the paper down on the marble island. That vindictive witch. She's been trying to come after me for years. Someone is feeding her lies. Lies. He was looking at her, his eyes boring into her, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of triumph. She met his gaze with a carefully constructed mask of wide-eyed concern. "My God, Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. That's horrible. Who would do such a thing?" He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching into an unbearable tension. She could see the gears turning in his mind, the paranoia warring with his ingrained belief in her meekness. He wanted to believe she was incapable of such a calculated betrayal. His ego demanded it. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. He let out a long, weary breath, the rage seeming to drain out of him, replaced by a practiced performance of a man under siege. "I don't know," he said, slumping into a chair. "But I'm going to find out. And when I do, I am going to destroy them." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I need you by my side for this, Liv. We have to present a united front, you and me against the world, just like we always planned." He reached for her hand. His touch was like ice. "Of course, darling," she said, forcing a smile as she allowed him to pull her closer. "Whatever you need." As she stood there, his arm around her, the smell of his fury and fear filling the air, she felt a cold, terrifying certainty. This was just the beginning. The story was out. The storm had broken. And they were standing directly in its path. Thea Gallo's article was not a bomb. It was a contagion. It spread through the city's financial and political ecosystems with terrifying speed, infecting every aspect of Richard's life. The first 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic phone calls, cancelled meetings, and the palpable chill of his powerful friends suddenly becoming unavailable. The sterling brand, once synonymous with luxury and success, was now tainted by the whiff of corruption. Richard, true to form, came out swinging. He convened a press conference in the lobby of Sterling Tower, a marble and glass cathedral to his own ego. Standing before a wall of cameras, with Olivia positioned slightly behind him, as the supportive stoic wife, he was a masterclass in controlled indignation. "These are baseless smears." He thundered, his voice resonating with rehearsed outrage. "The work of a journalist with a personal vendetta and a cowardly anonymous source who is feeding her lies. My business dealings are an open book. My success was earned through hard work and innovation, not by cutting corners or breaking laws. We will be pursuing every available legal option against the New York Chronicle for this malicious and defamatory attack." Olivia played her part, her expression a perfect blend of concern for her husband and dignified defiance. Inside, she was a roiling sea of anxiety and a grim, burgeoning satisfaction. She watched him lie to the world, to the battery of reporters, and felt not a shred of her former love, only a profound and chilling alienation. The man she had married had never really existed. He was a performance, and this was his grandest, most desperate one yet. But the performance wasn't working. Thea Gallo was too respected, her reporting too meticulous. The story had legs. The district attorney's office issued a terse no comment when asked if they were looking into the allegations, a phrase that in political parlance meant, yes, absolutely. Investors in his new development project began to get nervous. A Japanese consortium, which had been poised to inject $500 million into the deal, announced they were postponing their decision, pending further review. The stock price of Sterling Enterprises, his publicly traded parent company, dipped 5%, then 10%. The pressure began to fray Richard at the edges. The mask of the confident tycoon would slip, revealing the snarling, paranoid man beneath. The penthouse, once a quiet sanctuary, became a pressure cooker. He would pace for hours, phone fused to his ear, alternating between barking orders at his legal team and trying to soothe the nerves of his dwindling allies. His suspicion of Olivia was a constant, unspoken hum beneath the surface of their interactions. He had his security team sweep the apartment for bugs, a move he explained as standard procedure given the circumstances. He bought her a new phone, a present, he said, but she knew it was a tracking device, a way to monitor her every communication. She used it only for mundane conversations, continuing to communicate with Maya through a cheap burner phone she kept hidden in a box of tampons, the one place she knew he would never look. Then came the Chloe problem. The influencer, who had built a career on being aspirational and carefree, was not equipped for this kind of crisis. The comments on her Instagram feed had turned vicious. She was no longer just a home wrecker. She was now associated with a brewing criminal scandal. Her sponsors began to pull out. A lucrative contract with a high-end tequila brand was suddenly under review. Chloe panicked. She started calling Richard constantly, her voice a shrill, hysterical whine that Olivia could hear even from the next room. "You have to fix this, Richie," she'd shrieked during one call Olivia overheard. "My reputation is ruined. That journalist is going to start digging into me next. I just know it. Our contract says you're supposed to handle this stuff." Their business arrangement was crumbling under the pressure. Chloe, the carefully curated asset, had become a massive liability. After one particularly nasty, hour-long phone call, Richard smashed a Lalique vase against the wall, the sound of shattering crystal echoing the state of his life. He turned to Olivia, his eyes wild. "Do you see what they're doing to us?" "To our family," he demanded, as if she were a co-conspirator in his own defense. It was in that moment that Olivia decided to twist the knife. "Maybe you should just pay her more," she said, her voice deceptively gentle. She was arranging a bouquet of fresh lilies, her movements calm and deliberate. Richard froze. "What did you say?" Chloe Olivia said, not looking at him. "It's clearly a business arrangement. You have a contract after all. Maybe you just need to renegotiate her consulting fee to include hazard pay." The blood drained from his face. It was a direct hit. The one piece of information he couldn't fathom how she would know. He had been so careful with that folder, so certain of his digital security. The look in his eyes was no longer mere suspicion. It was a cold, terrifying certainty. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was far more potent than his earlier theatrics. Olivia finally looked up, meeting his gaze with a cool, level stare. "You're a terrible liar, Richard. And you're sloppy. You leave things open on your computer." The charade was over. The unspoken war was now declared. "You," he seethed, taking a step towards her. "This was you. You went to Gallo. Prove it," she said, her voice steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. He stalked towards her, his face a mask of fury, his hands clenched into fists. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to hit her. She stood her ground, her chin held high, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. His eyes followed the movement, and he stopped, his chest heaving. The baby, her silent, unknowing protector. "I am going to ruin you," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous promise. "When this is over, you will have nothing. No money, no friends. People will see you for the vindictive gold-digging snake you are. I will make sure of it. You can't ruin me, Richard, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Because I was never one of your assets, and you are about to learn what happens when you write off a liability that knows all your secrets. He stared at her, breathing heavily, the hatred in his eyes a palpable force. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer about money or infidelity. It was a primal struggle for survival. He would use all his power, all his wealth and influence to crush her. But she had the one thing he didn't: the truth. And she had given it to a woman who was about to publish her second installment. The fallout was just beginning. The week after their confrontation was a new kind of hell. The penthouse was no longer a home, but a battlefield thick with the silence of unspoken threats. Richard had his lawyers draft a public statement for Olivia to sign a declaration of her unwavering belief in his innocence. She refused. Her defiance sent him into a silent, simmering rage that was more unnerving than any of his shouted tirades. He had her followed. A sleek black town car would be parked across the street whenever she left the building. He was trying to intimidate her, to isolate her, to box her in. Meanwhile, Thea Gallo's second article hit the newsstands. This one was even more devastating than the first. The headline was stark: "The Sterling Ledgers. A how-to guide for bribing public officials." Thea, using the information from the thumb drive, published redacted snippets of the financial records from the Project Nightingale folder. She detailed the exact dates and amounts of the wire transfers from Sterling Enterprises to the Shell Company, and from the Shell Company to Councilman Jennings' campaign fund. It was a smoking gun, a clear and undeniable map of corruption. The story ignited a political firestorm. Councilman Jennings held a disastrous press conference where he sweated profusely and denied everything, looking guiltier with every word. The mayor, a longtime ally of Richard's, was forced to call for an independent investigation. The sharks were circling. Olivia watched it all unfold from her gilded prison, a strange mix of terror and triumph churning in her gut. She had set this in motion, but the story now had a life of its own, a powerful momentum she couldn't control. The breakthrough came from a place she hadn't expected. In a quiet suburb in New Jersey, a man named Frank Miller read Thea Gallo's latest article, his morning coffee growing cold in his hands. Frank was Sterling Enterprises' former chief financial officer. He was a quiet, meticulous accountant who had worked for Richard for 15 years. A year ago, Frank had discovered the Project Nightingale discrepancies. He had gone to Richard naively believing his boss would be horrified that it must be some kind of mistake. Richard had fired him on the spot. He'd had him sign an ironclad NDA in exchange for a meager severance package and threatened to ruin his reputation in the industry if he ever spoke a word. Frank, a man with a mortgage and 2 kids in college, had been terrified into silence. But seeing Thea's article, seeing the very secrets he had been forced to keep, laid bare for the world to see, sparked a flicker of courage in his long-dormant conscience. He knew he had something even more valuable than the ledgers Thea had published. He had the recordings. Richard, in his arrogance, had a habit of recording his meetings. He called it keeping an accurate record. Frank knew it was for blackmail purposes. For his own protection, Frank had made a copy of one specific recording before he was fired, the meeting where Richard and Councilman Jennings explicitly discussed the quid pro quo arrangement. The zoning variance in exchange for a series of offshore payments. It was the one piece of evidence that could send them both to prison. After a week of agonizing of sleepless nights and hushed, fearful conversations with his wife, Frank Miller made a decision. He found Thea Gallo's contact information and sent her a one-line email. "I have the rest of your story." Thea, sensing the magnitude of the moment, arranged to meet him immediately. The recording was everything she had hoped for, and more. The audio quality was crystal clear. Richard's voice, smug and self-assured, laying out the terms of the bribe. Jennings's greedy, eager acceptance. It was the nail in the coffin. Richard, however, was not a man to go down without a fight. He was bleeding money, his allies were abandoning him in droves, and the DA was impaneling a grand jury. He was desperate, and his desperation made him reckless. Through his own network of private investigators, he found out that Thea had been in contact with a disgraced former CFO. He put two and two together, and realized Frank Miller was about to betray him. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove out to Frank's suburban home himself. No lawyers, no security. He thought he could intimidate his former employee back into silence the way he always had. He offered Frank money, a lot of it, to disappear, to deny everything. When Frank refused his newfound courage holding firm, Richard's temper snapped. The argument spilled out onto the front lawn. "You are nothing!" Richard screamed, his face contorted with rage, completely oblivious to the neighbor across the street who was filming the entire exchange on her phone. "I made you, and I will destroy you. I will ruin your family." The threat, crude and desperate, was a critical error. The neighbor who had already been following the Sterling scandal in the news immediately sent the video to the local TV station. By that evening, the footage was everywhere. Richard Sterling, the sophisticated billionaire, was exposed as a common thug, threatening a scared, middle-aged man on his own front lawn. It shattered the last remnants of his public image. It was ugly, it was raw, and it was undeniable. Back in the penthouse, Olivia watched the news report, her hand covering her mouth in shock. This was beyond anything she could have orchestrated. Richard's own hubris, his own uncontrollable rage, was proving to be his most effective enemy. The phone rang. It was Maya. "It's over, Liv," she said, her voice awestruck. He just handed the prosecution a witness tampering charge on a silver platter. "He's done." Later that night, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Richard. It was two detectives from the NYPD. They were polite, professional, and deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sterling," one of them began, "we have a warrant for your husband's arrest. We have reason to believe he may be here." Olivia stood in the doorway of the life that was now collapsing around her. She had a choice. She could have told them he wasn't there, bought him a few more hours of freedom. But she thought of the ultrasound, of the cold clinical room, of the lie about Dubai, of the casual cruelty in his eyes when he realized she knew. She looked past the detectives down the long marble hallway towards the master bedroom, where she knew he was hiding, making frantic phone calls to lawyers who were no longer answering. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He's here. Please come in." The arrest was a quiet, humiliating affair. There was no dramatic chase, just the surreal sight of Richard Sterling, his face slack with shock, being led out of his own penthouse in handcuffs. The click of the cuffs was the punctuation mark at the end of their marriage. In the days that followed, Richard's empire imploded. The recording from Frank Miller and the witness tampering video created an open and shut case. His allies vanished, and his company fell apart. Thea Gallo's final article was less an exposé and more a eulogy for a fallen titan, noting that Richard's greatest liability was his inability to see the value in the people he considered his assets. Guided by Maya Olivia, filed for divorce. The infidelity clause, bolstered by the St. Bart's photo and Chloe Vanderbilt's tell-all interview, made the proceedings swift. Richard, facing decades in prison, signed the papers from a holding cell. Olivia took what the prenup stipulated, a fortune she didn't want for herself. She sold the penthouse, erasing every trace of him to scrub clean the gilded cage. 6 months later, Olivia was living in a sun-drenched Brooklyn brownstone. The proceeds from the sale were in a trust for her daughter Lily, and funded a new foundation. She started to provide legal aid to women in abusive relationships. She returned to work at the library, not for the money, but for the peace it brought her. One afternoon, while rocking her 1-month-old daughter, a news alert popped up on her phone. It was the headline she had been waiting for. Sterling sentenced to 20 years. Judge cites staggering arrogance. She read that his downfall was traced back to a single ill-advised beach selfie. Looking at Lily sleeping in her arms, Olivia whispered, "He thought he was the star of the show, but he was just the villain in our story. And we get to write the happy ending." The story of Richard Sterling was over. Hers was just beginning. She was no longer a wife or a victim, but a mother, a philanthropist, and a survivor who had turned his ugliest secrets into a force for good. He wanted a headline, and she had given him exactly what he deserved. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Olivia's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest strength is found in our most painful moments. It's a reminder that no one is untouchable, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit, then please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button if you were cheering for Olivia. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Your support allows us to keep telling these important stories. Thank you for listening.